you are unfamiliar with Allraise, we are a startup that started about 1.5 years ago. We're a nonprofit startup with the goal and the mission of accelerating progress for women in the tech ecosystem, and hopefully not just women, but women, people of all kinds. And we're starting with a focus on accelerating success for more successful female founders and more successful female funders. And hopefully in the future, we'll be able to expand that to women and people of color and people from all kinds of backgrounds just being successful in tech in general, regardless of what your job or role is. Now, we know both, many of us from personal experience, from the experience of our friends, from looking at the data, that tech is an incredible, incredible engine of opportunity that can change lives, it can change cultures, it can change society. And unfortunately, kind of since the dawn of it, it probably has not been very accessible or very safe for a lot of people. And that's part of the mission that we want to change. And when I think about the incredible impact on society and on familial wealth and on policy and on politics, if I think about the impact of companies like Facebook or Twitter or Google or Airbnb or Netflix or Salesforce, or imagine a future where those companies with the kind of scale, wealth creation, and impact were founded by women and people of color. Or at least half of the teams are balanced. If you think about like the impact on society that those companies have had, that is a future that's possible. I think if we all work together and if we help each other. But it's only possible, I think, with some different factors. One is there are a lot of volunteers that make Allraise work, and we have a long way to go. This is going to be a many-year journey, and we need a lot more help. But we get a lot of help already. So raise your hand if you're in this room and you are currently an Allraise volunteer in some way. Yay! This is so exciting. And so thank you so much. Like it is really a volunteer-driven organization, and we're growing. And hopefully we'll create more opportunities for people to volunteer. Raise your hand if you've been part of an Allraise program in some way, like a cohort or a boot camp or office hours or something like that. And so we have, yay! So we have lots of programs, and we'll have more programs. The other thing, in addition to volunteers, that makes this possible and that will make our work possible is our financial supporters, who are not just financial supporters, but also like they're moral supporters. They're our angel investors, and so I really wanted to thank SVB, E&Y, SVB, our SVB friends are here somewhere in the room, E&Y, Pivotal, JP Morgan, and Anchor Point. They're kind of our founding angel investors, and all the things that we do at Allraise and all the things we will do are only possible because of our financial sponsors. The third thing that makes this possible is we're in the process of recruiting a world-class team to Allraise, and we so far have 2 amazing full-time team members. Steffi, who's here, who runs communications for us, and Pam Koska, our new CEO. And Pam is just incredible, and so she is going to be leading the mission and the charge, and all of us. She's our new boss at Allraise, and we just could not be more thrilled for Pam to be our new boss. So thank you so much, Pam.
Thank you.
And Pam is here having a conversation with a very special person, our special guest, and our first ever, I just think it's so great that Kat is our first Allraise speaker, because she is an incredible human being, but also a path breaker. So you're the youngest woman to ever take a company public. It's a pretty big deal. When Kat she started her company in 2011, and in 2017 she took it public. And she was the only woman to take a tech company public that year. And obviously, how many of you have been a customer or know about SFIX? Everyone in this room, right? I mean, I think Kat has proven that you can build a great business that's for women and powered by women. She's broken so many kind of records and so much space by being an incredible leader. I remember talking in early days. I was really impressed the quality of people that you recruited to your team, pretty early. I was talking to a friend who had gone to join Kat as your VP of Operations and Logistics, who is older, had many years of experience, and I was asking him how it was going. And he said, Kat is the best boss I've ever had. He said, I have worked for a lot of people with a lot of experience at very big Fortune 100 companies. He said, she is the smartest person I've ever worked for. She has built the best culture. I learned, like, and watching her go from room to room, like she could be in a marketing meeting and then a finance meeting and then a merchandising meeting and a planning meeting and a logistic meeting. She can walk in to a thing that we've been noodling over for hours and hours, and in 5 minutes she sees something that none of us caught, and she gives us advice. She's in and out. She's like a Navy SEAL, and she adds value in every room she walks into. And so I think for so many reasons, like, you're an inspiration to me, to everyone in this room, not only for kind of the financial success that you built, but also I think for the kind of leader and the kind of person you are. So I think it's really fitting that you're our first speaker, and I'll let you guys have the conversation. Thanks for being here, Kat.
Thank you for having me. And it's just to add to the intro, Aileen has seen me and this company through so many stages. I was standing up here looking at Aileen thinking, I have cried in your office. I have called you crying. Like, she wasn't even on my cap table, and she was... And she's been like such an amazing support for me throughout the many years of Stitch Fix. And so I just love seeing this group together, and I love the mission of this, of really helping each other, because this was something that was happening even in 2011, but not in this amazing, real, everybody in a room way. And so I just get goosebumps in this room, because I look back on my time in 2011 and 2012 and what I would have given to be able to be in a room with all of you. So thank you so much for all of this.
Well, we are really excited to have you. Clearly there have many, many moments of inspiration this morning already, but a housekeeping issue: if you hear another moment of inspiration, you want to share it out, please do #AllRaise and #HowSheBuiltThis. Would be much appreciated. We are video recording this as well, so it is on the record. Feel free to share what you would like, and we will be making the video available afterwards for people who couldn't join us here, because we know how inspirational you are to everybody in the community. So we're excited to have you here. I thought we could maybe kick it off with, it's always interesting to hear somebody tell their own story. So maybe give us a brief synopsis of the milestones or the highlights of your journey to sitting in this chair today.
I'll try to do like the 5-minute version, maybe less.
Perfect.
I mean, I think some interesting points are like, one, like I was not cultivated as an entrepreneur. Like, I didn't have a family that was full of entrepreneurs. My dad had exactly 2 jobs in his life. He worked at the university. My mom was a public school teacher. Like there was no influence to me that I should ever be an entrepreneur growing up. And I really ended up here really by process of elimination, of feeling like there's such an opportunity to like make the idea of how do I find clothes that I love, like there's such a better way to do this. And there just has to be a better way. Like, you look around and you look at the way technology was touching so many other parts of our lives, and like nobody was thinking about like how difficult it is to look at like an e-commerce page of 1 million pairs of black jeans and like know which ones are right for you. Like, it's super hard, and like there's no way that technology can't help that problem. And so I was just like obsessed with that problem, and I spent a lot of time before I started the company trying to either work at a retailer who was going to solve the problem, and then I couldn't find any retailers, and I was like, I'll join a startup. And so I met a bunch of different startups and did projects for some startups, and couldn't find anyone that I thought was kind of like, this is going to be the thing. And then by process of elimination, really, I was like, well, like I guess if I want to work at a company like this, I can start it on my own. And so I just feel so lucky that I even found this, because I do think like I think I'm good at this. Like, I do feel like this is my calling, and I do feel like this was the right career for me. And I look back on my life and I'm kind of regretful that like it wasn't obvious to me earlier in my life. And so I think that's kind of a lesson in and of itself, of just like there's a societal expectation of like, what does an entrepreneur look like that I don't look like, that many of you don't look like. And I think it's really, really important that we start to change that, and we start to change that perception, and that we can I think evolve what even people who like my kids and all of our kids are going to look at and think about, like, oh, what are the career opportunities for me, and what's available to me. And then, I mean, I think, broadly speaking, the major milestones were really, I think there's milestones around funding. Like I think even getting the very first check that we had, so Kinder St. Cassidy was our very first check, and then that helped us to get a seed round done, and being able to have that, kind of a signal from somebody that's like, I believe in you so much, I'm willing to hand over some cash, which was definitely a very scary moment. And then fundraising from then on is part of the narrative, unfortunately, because it was really, really hard. And it was really hard. The private rounds are hard. Even the public round was hard. And so this, I think being able to, like, some people can be really amazing entrepreneurs because they're really good at raising money. And like that's actually a real way to be a good entrepreneur. Like if you have tons of money, you can hire whoever you want. Like you can make all kinds of mistakes and cover it with money. Like you can pivot your business 5 times. Like you have so many more chances if you raise tons of money. And so like that actually is a successful way to be a good entrepreneur, is like being able to do that. I am not good at that to this day. Like I am not good at that. I was never good at that. And so I had to figure out like, how do you be an entrepreneur without being good at that and be good at the other things? And so, I think the things that I'm most proud of are the culture that we built, the amazing people that we were able to recruit, even though we didn't have, hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank. And I think also just very proud of being able to build a healthy business along the way. And it's now probably too dated, but there are investors that like for years would send entrepreneurs to me. Like entrepreneurs would ask like any fundraising tips, and they'd be like, oh, nobody knew their business inside and out like Katrina Lake, and like you should go talk to her. And like that, I had to do that because I wasn't good at some of the other elements, but I really knew my business and I really understood how could I make my business work with less cash, and how can I have more levers available to me even when money wasn't easy to raise. And so I don't know, it's kind of hard to skip over all these things, but circuitously, I think that's kind of where we are now. And now, we're at a place where it's a totally different job that I have as CEO, and I think the part that is still the same though is that every year is different. I'm learning new things. I have to be good at different things, and I think another concept that I think about a lot is like rehiring myself and like recognizing that the job is changing every single year, and is there a way that I can make sure that I'm excited for that job? I know how that job's changing. I have the self-awareness to know that this year I need to be spending my time in different ways than last year in order to be effective. And so that definitely rings very true today when, for example, we have earnings next week. Like that's a whole bucket of things that I wasn't spending my time on 2 years ago, but is really important and is something that I'm learning to be better and better at now.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I did want to go back and pull on the thread a little bit about raising capital, because I think this is a hot topic. We talk about it at All Raise all the time, which is the capital efficiency that women have. And is it a hallmark of a great CEO? Is it foisted upon women because they, on average, raise anywhere from 30 to 40 cents for every dollar that a man does? So I'm curious if we can forget that you raised 45 or 43 million in your journey?
I don't even remember. Less than 50.
Okay, less than 50. And in an era when, I was online last night looking, a mega round, 100 million raised in a month. There's 40 mega rounds going on a month now. So just curious about your comments and advice there's a lot of founders in this audience about how to navigate that as a woman and capital efficiency and any, let's drill into that just a little bit more based on your experiences.
Yeah. The topic sometimes is like super infuriating to me, because sometimes you'll see like, oh, this person built $1 billion business, and then you look and they raised $1 billion. I'm like, that's actually money laundering. Like I can just like raise $1 billion and have $1 billion in revenue like that, right? And so it's like, it's really frustrating, because I think the really impressive businesses are the ones where somebody has a $10 million business, but it's bootstrapped. Like that's amazing. And so, I think that like as a society, we're sometimes looking at the wrong metrics. And so it's definitely like, it can be an infuriating topic for me, but I think some of the tips, I can't speak for all women, but I think in my case, I was capital efficient because I had to be capital efficient. Like, would I have liked to have raised $100 million and had like a super fancy office and like lunch every day? Like, to be honest, that actually would have ended up in a worse outcome for Stitch Fix, I think, if I'm totally honest. But like at that moment in time, every day I would have happily traded to have $100 million in the bank every day. Like now in retrospect, I can see the things that it made us stronger in. The flip side is you don't know the things that it could have made us stronger with, right? Like there are things like if it was a super competitive environment, like you really do need to have the ammunition to grow faster and to spend more money. Was there talent that we missed out on because we didn't have the right amount of money? Like it's possible, right? So it's hard to know like what we would have missed out on, but I do think in my case it was because we couldn't raise money, and so you had to figure out like how am I going to make less with more. In terms of like, should that be a hallmark of female founded businesses? Like, I hope not. Like, I think even though I think capital efficient and raising tons of money, like that's a good combination. So I don't know. Like it's funny because I do have some entrepreneurs who come to me and they're like, I just love how capital efficient you were and share your tips with me. And I don't think it's right for every business. Like I think it was right. I mean, it had to be right for us because those were the circumstances we were dealt. But, if you have the opportunity to raise a lot of money, and in a lot of cases, like you probably should do that. And so I wasn't fortunate enough to have that choice. And I can look back and think of the good things that came from that. But, I do hope that in the future we'll see female founders that are capital efficient because they had to be. We'll also see female founders that are not capital efficient because they're in a super competitive environment and they need to be aggressive and they need to raise tons of money. And we'll also see female founders who are capital efficient and raise lots of money. I hope this is just the beginning, but that we'll see more varieties of that in the future.
I think we'll come back to that at the end of our conversation too. Scaling the business. So that's a big thing to get the product market fit, but then to scale it. And you're continuing to scale it every day, opening up new product categories, expanding internationally. Were you always oriented on building in scalability into the business?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I think just to give you with Stitch Fix, like we had such amazing product market fit early, and we didn't have the infrastructure or the team to scale that immediately. And so there were times in Stitch Fix where we had like a completely subpar, everything, frankly. There's the first year we didn't even have a website. And I'm looking at our original CTO is here, Jeff. Hi, Jeff. Jeff could speak to some of the early ugly things we were doing. But there were a lot of things that were manual in the early days. Even a couple years in, there were times when our merchandising hadn't caught up to the preferences of our clients, and we knew that. But it's there's a long lead time for these things. So there's just a lot of imperfection that we had to live with along the way. And it's funny because now when we launch a new business, when we launch men's, the bar is so much higher now. The things that we did when we first launched women's, were totally unacceptable to do now when you're an established business and you're launching a new business. And so that's a whole other kind of conversation. But I think that we weren't always, I think from an operational capacity, whatever perspective, we just couldn't have known how fast the business was going to grow. It was something we went from a few $100,000 to a couple $1 million to tens of millions of dollars to I don't know, 200 and 750. I can't even remember the early numbers, but it was just crazy. And we did our best to keep up with it, but we weren't necessarily planning that way. The place that I did plan, though, is on the people side. And so I think one of the hardest things as a founder, especially when your business is growing like this, is you have to grow like this. And we still talk about this at Stitch Fix. It's our business is growing 25% year over year. Our business is 40% bigger now than it was 2 years ago. And then and the challenge is you, who was hired 2 years ago, are you 40% bigger this year than you were 2 years ago? And it's a real challenge. And when you're doing a startup and you are growing at thousands of percent year over year, or hundreds of percents, then you really have to be looking at the steepness of that curve and challenging yourself of what is the next year going to look like, and what is the year after that going to look like, and how is the way that I spend my time going to have to change. And so for all of us, I'm assuming that all of us have not done this many times before. I had never done this before. I had never managed anybody before. I had one intern that I managed in one job, and that was the only person I had ever managed. I'd worked at Banana Republic in a smoothie shop. I wasn't even the manager there. I was the one making the smoothies and washing the the blender. Like I wasn't even managing people in those jobs. And so like I had never managed anybody before I started Stitch Fix. And so, I have to grow like this. And so figuring out like Mike Smith, who might have been who Aileen was talking about, who was the COO at Walmart.com, like he had done like that and that, and so he wasn't scared by like this ramp, and he wasn't scared by like being $100 million or having 3 distribution centers. Like those are all things that he totally knew how to do. And so to try to make it so that like I could have the support of people as I was trying to ramp up this curve, to make it so that like I think it's really hard, but like you don't want every single person on your team like climbing that same mountain. Like you need people who've done it before, and you need people who can kind of pull you up and support you along the way. At least that's my perspective. And so even though like operationally and from like a capacity perspective, we had no idea, like in a lot of cases, we had no idea how much revenue we were going to do the next year, and so the scaling part was really hard. At least the people side, I felt like we did a pretty good job of. We brought in a lot of people who were excited to do this part of the curve, but also like had seen things farther up in the curve, and so so they're like, actually, it's a funny story. Like I remember when Mike first joined, and he had been literally the CEO of Walmart.com, and he showed up, and we were doing all of our distribution out of our office, which was like, I don't know, like maybe this side of the room sized. And I mean, I really couldn't believe he joined. I was like, what are you doing here? Like we were picking and packing the product. Like on Mondays, everybody, like myself, Cotil who's here, like, I mean, every Monday, it like didn't matter what your job was, like you were on the line packing clothes and folding them and steaming them and putting them in a box. And Mike had run like millions of square feet of warehouse space before. And so like Mike was not very good at this job. Like he was on the line and he was supposed to be like picking something, and like there were a couple errors, and we were like, okay, we have to move Mike to do something else because he's not very good at picking. So, so maybe we can have him tape boxes shut, which is like what he did instead. And I remember we were like preparing for a fundraising deck, and I had asked Mike to help, and like I sent him like some Excel file and something to make a chart, and he was like terrible at Excel and like really bad at PowerPoint. And I was like, oh, this is so annoying. And like, but I remember thinking to myself, like, in a year, it is not going to matter that Mike doesn't know how to use Excel, because like Mike has been the CEO of Walmart.com. Like he obviously hasn't done anything in Excel in years. So like, why would I didn't hire him to be good at Excel. And so, sometimes there are those trade-offs where you're bringing in people who like are not going to be as good at the job today, and you're betting on the future. But my point is more of like, even without knowing exactly what that path to scale was going to look like I think being able to have the people around me that had some experience in that was enormously helpful, because we could never have predicted what the exact challenges were going to be in the future, but we could predict we were going to have challenges and what sorts of challenges they might be. And so to have the people around the table that really could help with that was like just an incredible gift. I don't even know if I answered your question.
You did. We were talking about scaling, and you were talking about scaling people, and I think that's a really important asset to have, and that you also really kind of embraced how you could surround yourself with people who are better than you. But you've also spoken about being underestimated and what that feels like, but that there's also a value associated with that. So I was wondering, and I think all of us here can probably resonate with being underestimated, and so advice to us about how to use that and leverage that as an asset as opposed to a negative.
Yeah, and to be clear, this is another one that I feel like we're like forced into the bucket of being underestimated. I'm not necessarily like championing that, people should want to be underestimated. But I do think that like the being underestimated, just like being the underdog in general, is I think a lot easier than being the one that is like expected. Like being LeBron James, I think, is a lot harder than being like Steph Curry 5 years ago or 10 years ago. God, I feel old. Yeah, like probably more than 5 years ago. And I think there's just like, just having, I don't want to say like lower expectations, but like being able to surprise people, being able to, I think one of the tips that like I share with people who are raising money, who are thinking about, kind of, I don't know, building a company and having longer term relationships with investors, is like one of the things I used to do was I would pick, and Bill Gurley was on this list, but I had like a short list of a few investors who were people that like, if somebody ever wanted to invest in SFIX at some point in the future, I would love to work with them. And so like to be able to send people emails and say like, oh, here's some progress with the business, here's what's the latest that's happening. And you know, if you're surprising somebody where they like aren't really expecting the business to be all that interesting, and all of a sudden they're hearing more and more, and all of a sudden it's more and more interesting, like there's something in that that's like feels like, for him, for Bill Gurley, for whatever investor, feels like, oh, I found a gem, versus like, I think if you're the obvious expected thing, then like there's less of that attachment. And I don't know, I mean, I think overall, like I think people just like operate from the grit that you get from people when you're underestimated, I think is a much, much more powerful motivator than the like, oh, this company must be worth X or Y. And that I say more as I think about the IPO actually, and like we were supposed to price in one range, and then we're on the road show, and then by like the end of the second week or the middle of the second week, it's like obviously we're not going to price in the range, we're going to price lower. And I remember that day, like we realizing this, and it was me and Mike and my CFO, and we're in my hotel room in Denver where we had just done like a road show. And I like opened up and it was like not a very nice hotel, but we like opened up all of the little wines they had, like little like, you know, single serve wines, and like poured them into whatever vessels we could find, which was like a water cup from the kitchen, and then like a mug and one wine glass, I think. And like we poured the wine, and we're like, okay, we're gonna have to call the management team, and we're gonna have to tell them we're gonna price below the range, and like this is like everybody's gonna be so disappointed, and I was like dreading the IPO. I was like, it's just gonna be the worst, that I'm gonna be like I'm gonna be on TV, and it's gonna be so sad, and like and I mean, these were the actual thoughts going through my mind. I was like, and how am I gonna stand up there without like crying and disappointment? And like we called we could like put the phone on speaker and like have our little pity wine, and and we called the management team, and the management team was like, cool, like, F it. Like, we're going to show them that this is worth more. Like, they don't get it now, like, that's fine. Like, whatever. Like, this is going to wash out in the longer term. And, like, I felt like all of a sudden, like, I needed that from my management team at that moment where, like, I mean, we were trying to put on, like, a brave face and whatever. But to be able to feel from the team, and I think even from the broader team, even today, like, the company is undervalued. You look at other comps, like, I believe the company is undervalued, and the company even today should be worth more if we, you know, as we can help people to understand the story better. And I think that grit from being like, okay, like people don't believe in us, like, all right, like there's something that's super motivating about that to me, and I think to the team, and you know, you can't operate that way forever, obviously, but I think in those really hard moments, I think in some ways it was actually like a really powerful weapon. And I think that, you know, if you came out and the public offering was like super successful and everybody's like, this is the best thing ever, and then, you know, what's motivating your team to kind of do more? And so, and then it makes it harder actually once you go down from there. And so, you know, in a lot of ways, I can look at it and feel like it's a good thing, but you know, obviously I hope that people in this room aren't underestimated as frequently as I have been.
Well, we certainly think that you're a role model that's helping to change that. And I'm going to pull on that IPO moment, because you have been a role model for many people and an inspiration. And there was that inspiring moment when you held your son at the bell. That I think was a very authentic moment for you, not planned whatsoever, but really resonated with a lot of women. And then more recently, you've been a CEO in maternity leave. And so would love for you to comment on some of those authentic moments and the importance of what you're doing as a visible call out to women, and to help us change the dynamic as a very visible CEO of a successful company.
Yeah, that IPO moment is a really funny one, because it was totally unplanned, and in a lot of ways, the fact that the week leading up to the IPO was really hard and just kind of, you know, shitty, was like, that was kind of what enabled that moment, because leading up to that, like, I literally, like, when we called the management team, I was literally sitting there thinking, like, how am I going to stand up on that stage and not cry? Like, it was really ridiculous in retrospect. Like, no matter what happens on the IPO, like, that day is so happy and it was so fun, and like there was nothing that could have made that moment like a terrible moment. But for some reason on Wednesday, I really thought that, but it really gave me this license, I feel like, to just make it our own, and for us to be like, you know what, like, who cares about the price of it? Like, this is about like us and what we've achieved in our company and our future. And like, we're just going to make it ours. And like NASDAQ has like a shot list, like a wedding of like all the pictures you're supposed to take and who's supposed to be on the stage at certain times. And I was just like, screw it. Like, everyone's going to be on the stage. We're all doing this together. And like, and there was like and the way that my son ended up on stage was actually that like there was a little speech that I did to, I don't know if that was internal or if it was to everybody, but like he was kind of making noise. So I went and got him and I had him on my arm and I was feeding him a bagel while I was talking, and like and then that transitioned into this other thing, and I was like, well, screw it, like this, we're just going to keep everybody up here. And and it meant so much. I think being able to share that moment in the way that I wanted to have that moment meant a lot to me, and then it meant so much to me that it meant so much to everybody else, because I think it was just one of these things that like we couldn't have planned for it to land that way. And I think just to be able to see like a different version of what is an authentic leader look like, I think was meaningful, and like it meant a lot to me also that I got to have that moment in the way that I wanted to have it. And then I don't know what else I say. So broadly speaking, like figuring out how, this is a broader thing that's not even about being an entrepreneur, but it is really hard that like the ages that kind of matter the most in your career are this like 30 to early 40s stage, and then that's also when you're supposed to have kids. Like, it's just like really a hard part about being a woman that like we just need to say out loud. Like, I don't have any answers to it. I don't know what it is, but all I can say is that like it just complicates things a lot. And so, you know, thinking about even like that IPO, we had to kind of think about like, okay, I have 2 kids now. Like, you have to do the thing between the 2 kids, right? Like, you don't really want to do it in the middle. And so like there are all these like, and even now like traveling, like I was lamenting to Aileen that I travel a lot, and so right now I have a 6-month-old, and so the first few months I was out on maternity leave for 16 weeks, which we'll talk about also, which was great. And then when I came back, so between 4 months and 6 months, I was like, okay, like I'm not totally sure how I'm gonna do this 2-kid thing, and the kid, like the younger one's not sleeping through the night. I didn't want to saddle my husband with being home with 2 kids for mornings and evenings all the time, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna bring the baby with me. So I would like travel with the baby and then have my mom meet me or have babysitter set up in the other city. And like after earnings one time, we were like in San Francisco, did earnings, got on a plane, got in New York really late, had meetings in New York from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m., got in a car, went to the airport, flew to Chicago, got into Chicago at like 10 p.m., then was in meetings all day from 8 till 5. Then at the end of that, got on a plane, like got into San Francisco at like 11 p.m. And like I brought my like 5-month-old on this. And it was just like, but it was, you know, in some ways it was nice, and in some ways it was terrible.
I was going to say courageous was the word that was coming to my mind.
Yeah, and so like every plane flight, I'm like entertaining the baby and like, you know, trying to do emails with one hand and my phone, and like, and you're not sleeping, and I'm like getting up 3 times a night, and it was just like, you know, it wasn't great. I don't know, like I'm glad that I did it, I guess, but like.
You survived, you're on the other side.
Right, but I mean, these things are just like, they're really hard, and I don't know that there needs to be a solution, but I think it just needs to be an acknowledgement of just like, there are elements of this job that are just harder when you end up in a position of being the primary caretaker more often than not. So anyway, I don't even know how I wandered into this conversation, but maternity leave, I will say, like, I'm very fortunate. I mean, it's another reason I have a really great team. Like, I mean, having a really great team around me that really enabled me to take a full 16-week maternity leave for both of my kids really was a gift. And, you know, it's a gift because, like, first of all, like, I needed it. Like, I needed it for my sanity. I needed it to feel like I was, like, you know, just like the surface, like feeling like I'm being a good parent. Like, I needed it for that. And it's just like a really important time, I think, to have. And you know, and I am lucky that I think with the stage of company where we were with the team, I was able to do that. Like, I'm at no judgment. Like, if the company was in a super crappy place and I felt more needed there, like, I may not have chosen to do that, but it was my choice, and I was grateful that I had that choice. And yeah, I think I don't know, I'm glad.
Is there anything that you structured in particular around your company that enabled you to do it, or people that you looked to as kind of a guidepost for you along the way?
I mean, honestly, like, I just think the biggest learning for me is, like, I'm just not that important. Like, and I think all of us as founders in the roles that we are, like, it feels like, oh my God, I have so much on my shoulder and so much depends on me. And the reality is, like, it's going to be fine. Like, and I think both times, like, yes, I had some people in charge. Yes, I said, like, we're going to, I set some things up. But, like, the reality is that, like, people make it work. You have smart people who work with you. And, like, if things are on fire, they'll text you or they'll call you. Like, it's going to be okay. And so
it's a sign of a great leader that you've assembled a team who can operate without you, right?
But, yeah, and I think I just think, like, I don't know, every time I feel like you think it's going to be worse than it's actually going to be. And, like, it's fine. Life goes on. Everybody's capable. They're going to fill in the gaps for you. Like, it's going to be okay.
Fabulous. And as Aileen said, in 2017, you were the only female to take a company public, and now we look, and impressively, there are a whole cohort of women unicorns that are being announced. Away, Rent the Runway, Glossier, where you are a board member. Does this give you a sense of optimism? How do you compare and contrast in that short time frame the difference that exists, and what kind of hope or call to action does it bring to you as we move forward as an industry?
Yeah, I mean, I am hopeful and optimistic, and I am so proud that there are so many more women and who are getting that unicorn designation and being recognized really for, I think, the potential of the businesses that they're building. So I am absolutely very optimistic, and I'm excited. I think the flip side is, like, I would still love for there to be more. So I think we're making progress, and I think it's visible progress, which is the good thing, because I also think from a media perspective, like I think the progress, I mean, this is a double-edged sword, but, like, I think the media makes it feel like there's been more progress than there actually has been. And so, like, based on how much more you hear from female venture investors and female founders, like, it feels like, oh, like, things are changing, tides are moving. And, like, you look at the numbers and, like, they're a little better, but they're not, like, dramatically better. But I'm still happy that the media is more excited to cover these stories and think about these angles. And, like, I think the media now, like, I think if the New York Times is doing an article that's about venture investing and blah, 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 and the editor is going to look at it and be like, you don't even have a voice of a woman. Like, go back and find one, right? Like, I think those are the types of conversations that are having in the media that are actually helping to create that momentum. So I'm grateful for that, because I think it's super important to have that, but I also want to see more movement in the numbers.
Agreed. We have a lot of work that we still have ahead of us. Final words of wisdom before we open it up for a little Q&A. All along, you've really spoken about how you wanted to be known as a tech CEO, not as a female CEO, but I think you've learned to kind of embrace that designation. How conscious are you of continuing to trailblaze for women, and are there any final pieces of advice you'd like to share with them? I'm sure they're going to ask you for more, but is there anything top of mind that you want to share with them?
Yeah, what would I mean, I was so reticent in the beginning to be like, people would be like, oh, we want to do an article on, like, female CEOs. And I'm like, no, I want to be in your article about CEOs. Like, I think I didn't like that kind of specialness in the beginning. And I think now I just feel like it is super important, and it's really important because there are fewer role models, and there are fewer people that are kind of representing what leadership, like, that's not kind of a white dude, looks like. And so I think I have changed my perspective on that quite a bit. And in terms of advice, so the second question was
really just any final advice you'd give to somebody who's, there's a lot of female founders in the audience who hope to be in your chair at some point as the CEO of a public company. So any advice, and again, owning that feminism and that role, and reaching out to give back to the ones who are coming around you, beside you, and behind you.
Totally. I mean, I think my main thing is just that, like, the currency of today's leadership is, like, authenticity and vulnerability. And, like, that is very different actually than what leadership looked like 10, 15 years ago. And I think that like the best way to have an employee base that feels really connected to you, that has a clients that really feel connected to you, like all of that is through being authentically who you are. And I think it's such a gift that that's true, because I feel like 10 years ago, the way to be successful as a woman executive was to like put on a pantsuit and like, you know, and kind of be a woman in a man's world. And I think more and more we're seeing that people want to live in their own authentic, real world and not kind of this created, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but like this, you know, kind of fabricated thing. And so I think just that being able to be a leader in your own authentic way. And I think some of the things that I have done kind of deliberately, I would say, is, so one thing is actually using the word like. So people used to tell me, I used to have people who would come to a talk like this and, you know, and then would email, like this happened to me once, to be clear, but somebody on LinkedIn said something like, oh, you say like too much and it really makes you sound young and not very experienced. And I'm like, you know what, I am young and not very experienced. And I just was like, I need to actually keep saying like, because I think there are people out there where they're getting that feedback and that they're like, oh, well, I need to pretend to be old and experienced. And like that just, saying like doesn't make you a worse leader. And so like that's something that I've just decided I'm gonna own. Like there are all kinds of things that I call like normalize X, and like some of those things are like normalize pumping. Like I talk about pumping at work all the time, and like I'll be in a meeting and I'm like, hey guys, like I'm gonna have to leave in 5 minutes to pump. And like I do that on purpose because I know that there are people that could be more junior who might have a baby at some point and might feel uncomfortable in a meeting saying that, or even excusing themselves to go pump, right? And so I think there's a lot of things that being in the role that I am now that I have, you know, more, I don't know, flexibility or more ability to be able to kind of normalize some of these things, like leaving to pick up your kids, or my kid's sick, I have to leave early today. Like all of these things that like, I think in one world you could say like, by the way, I have to finish this meeting 5 minutes early. I could just say that, but I think to say and to pump like just like normalizes a little bit more. And so I think there's a lot of things that like I these micro behaviors I try to keep, I try to really be aware of, so that I can be role modeling not just in the big ways but in small ways, so that other you know, other women in the room can see that like it's okay to do this and it's okay to do that. So I don't know, that's really advice. But
I love those micro moments. I think that those are important. It's like the microaggressions that wear down on us every day that happen, that it's really important to put these micro moments in there too, that lift us up and normalize our lives and bring it into the fore. At this point, I want to open it up to some questions from the audience and see, I know we're running up against time, but Steffi and Terry both have microphones. There's one over here. Oh, there's all hands are going up.
You mentioned prioritizing culture. Can you speak a little bit more about kind of how you built that, how you feel about it?
Yeah, I think like in order to have like a really great culture, I think you need to have a framework and also have like be living and breathing it every day. And so we talk about values, and the values aren't just like words that you put on the wall, but if you're going to be talking about like responsibility as a value, like think about, like in our case, we think about our performance review process, and like if everybody in this room was a responsible person, like what would performance reviews look like? And so I think just like kicking the tires on like what would all of the things that we do as a company look like if I looked at it very strictly through the lens of my culture and my values, like that's a way to make it so that everybody is living and breathing the culture every day. And I think the bigger thing is just that like we very quickly got to a point where like the culture isn't me. Like Stitch Fix, like people are super into cats, like I'm just not into animals. Like there's all kinds of things that are like out of your control of like where the culture goes. But like and people say culture comes from the top, and it does, but the experience that people have of the culture has nothing to do with you. Like there are thousands of people who work at Stitch Fix who've never met me and never will. And so to be able to have a culture where you are first of all like expecting that people who join the company are going to live and breathe the culture and add to the culture and be advocates and ambassadors for the culture is super important in setting that precedent. And then making the culture so clear in a way that like people in our case, people in the warehouse, people who are stylists, like it works for a wide range of people, and is something, this is why I think like it, as cheesy as it is, like I do think it has to be structured and articulated, because like you need to be able to scale that. And then the last thing I would say about it is to like just try to strip the word culture fit out of your vocabulary and out of the vocabulary of the people, hiring managers at your companies. Like the culture fit is a Trojan horse for like somebody who looks and acts just like me. And like it is like the anti-diversity. And so what we talk about is like culture add of like, and I love culture add because it's first of all like it is appreciating people for their differences, and then also there's something about it that's like I am expecting you to add to the culture versus I'm expecting you to blend in and fit in. Like nobody wants that. And so I think that's like another thing that's been very powerful for us of thinking about how we can make sure that we're building the culture in a way that adding more people is actually making the culture stronger rather than making it more dilute.
Yeah. Hi ladies, thanks for the conversation. My name's Courtney. My question is for Katrina. How did you get to the point from you were managing one intern to now managing a very large company with lots of people? How did you scale yourself in your management skills, and maybe beyond mentors? Like, were there certain resources you were going to, workshops? How did you scale yourself in your management abilities?
To be honest, I think it was really just through the help of my team. And so I had a direct report team that had a lot more experience than I did. And so I learned a lot from them, frankly, of how to manage. And I think the other thing is just this idea of authenticity. Like if you think about what makes a great manager, so much of it is trust. Like it is like, I trust that they are looking out for me. I trust that they are giving me the right responsibility. I trust that they give me feedback. Like so much of what underlies actually that manager-direct relationship is trust. And the way that you build trust is through vulnerability and authenticity. And anybody can do that, even if you have 0 years of experience. Like just saying like, wow, like I've never done this before. Like, what do you think? Like, you know, wow, that was a really hard conversation. Like, you just acknowledging what, you know, the things that are hard and being vulnerable about it. Like, people are excited to help you and support you, and being vulnerable does not mean being weak. And so, you know, I don't know how I exactly did it, but I know it was super helpful to have people around me, and I do think that like being able to be authentic throughout the journey helped me to be able to bring those relationships along.
Thanks so much for this, Katrina. My name is Kanjun, and I'm wondering, you talked a little bit about fundraising, and it's something that is common. And I'm curious, what do you think are the differences between, you know, yourself? You kind of acknowledge that you're not very good at fundraising, and the people you see who are really good at fundraising. Like, what makes them so good? What? Why?
I have no idea. You should ask the venture people in the room. I don't know. I mean, I honestly, I really don't know. I think there are some things, like Stitch Fix early days, like there were some things that were structurally hard, where it was certainly structurally hard that most of the people I was pitching to were men, and that also that they were men of higher income, and so you didn't really understand the broad mass appeal. But the reality is, like, I also had women who said no to me. And so, you know, I think I don't really know. I think people, like, to this day, I still think it's kind of hard, and I don't know, like maybe I'm just not a very good salesperson in general, and that's fine. Like I think, you know, I've really come to terms with that, and like I just like now I feel like I've set up my whole business and my whole life in a way that, like, you know, that's not an area of the business that I have to spend a lot of time on. But I don't know, it's a really good question. I mean, I think the things that people say are like, oh, that female founders like don't pitch big enough, or they don't, you know, pitch the big vision and they pitch the small vision, and like I don't know if that was really true. It may have been, but like our business was really big, so I don't know. It's a good question. I think I'm good at hiring, and so like I mean, as I think about like what were the real secret sauces of Stitch Fix, like I think the hiring was super important, and I mean, what else? Like I feel like just like the search for product market fit of like just figuring out like the kind of taking a chance, figuring out the thing, and then really figuring out like what is the thing that's having the product market fit. Like I think that was the other thing early on that that was another kind of secret sauce moment. But I credit a lot of it to the team.
We're running out of time, so how about 2 more questions?
Hi everyone, my name is Trisha. So you mentioned in the beginning that your first year you guys didn't have a website. So what would you recommend for a startup's first year? What is necessary and what they can, what you can live without? What you guys did without?
Yeah, I mean, I love the purity of like just figuring out, does a consumer want this or not? And like you can do that in so many ways without, like, I think there's a philosophy of like build it and they will come, where it's like I'm going to build the most beautiful final version of X or Y and then I'm going to get customers. And there are so many examples. There's a huge graveyard of beautiful products and beautiful services that no one ever wanted. And so I think being able to really focus just on the like, what is the thing that I'm trying to prove, and then how can I prove it in the cheapest way possible? Like that's what we did. And so for us, it was really like, do people want to have clothes shipped to their home where they don't choose any of them and they're brands that they may not recognize? And like, can you know enough from somebody from an online style profile? Are people going to be willing to shop this way? And like you can actually do those things without, like we had Google Doc or SurveyMonkey and like PayPal. I mean, it was just like you could kind of prove a lot of those things without having the nice shiny website. And the other thing that I would say is just like, I mean, not that this was a super effective strategy, but once you had we had thousands of customers without a website, and then you can very easily say like, well, can you imagine like if we had a nice website, like we could have way more than thousands of customers, right? And so like then all of a sudden the like pitch to venture investors is theoretically easier. Like, I think then you're not building. The other reason is like you're not building products that the Stitch Fix was so different. Like we didn't necessarily know how clients would engage with it or how stylists would engage with it. And if we could just do it manually first, then we would build the product that we know was useful versus kind of creating tech debt by like creating a product and then realizing no, stylists actually want to do this instead. So then you're like kind of recreating the product. And I think there's just a lot of wasted engineering resources, but it's not for, anyway, sorry. The short version is like, I think just try to narrow in on like, what's the product market fit? What's the thing that you're going to scale that customers are going to love? And then how do I prove that there's demand for that? And just narrowly focusing on that is like, and doing it in the cheapest way possible is kind of the philosophy that we had.
Hi, Katrina and Pat. Thank you both so much for coming. By the way, love your Instagram stories. I feel like I'm a part of your fashion picking process.
Thank you.
My question is sort of towards mentorship. So you mentioned earlier on that you didn't have any experience with entrepreneurship, but now you're one of the most revered female entrepreneurs. I'm curious, when you were thinking of mentors or people that you wanted to support you, what was the criteria for that? And now, as you become a very successful businesswoman, what do you normally like to find in people that you would like to mentor?
So Kinder, who I mentioned, who was like the first check into Stitch Fix, she was somebody I'd worked with at Polyvore, and so she has definitely been a mentor. Selena Tabacanawa is somebody who has been a mentor and she was an advisor at one point, and she's been a mentor. Eric Colson, who actually joined the company, is our chief algorithms officer. He had been kind of an advisor and a mentor before. And I think in general, like, I would just say, like, I try to be agnostic about just like what role they want to play, and just surround myself with like the most amazing people that I can find that will be able to help. And so in some cases that's having somebody as an advisor. In some cases that's having somebody that I email once every couple months. In some cases it's it's somebody that we're able to bring onto the team. And like I had a Google Doc. I like still should have a Google Doc like this, but I used to have a Google Doc. It was organized by geography, so that like in different cities I could ping different people of just like people I want to meet, and just people that I thought were like amazing, incredible people that in some way could add value to Stitch Fix or me. And so I think there's been like a rotating, I think, group of those people over the years. In terms of companies that I mentor, like I will say that I think one of the hardest things about my job now, especially with the 2-kid thing, is just like how much I have to say no to. And it is like heartbreaking how many times I have to say no to like an entrepreneur that I really want to help, or like a company that I think is doing something super interesting and I totally could add so much value to them and help. And like that's actually the most heartbreaking part of my job right now, I think, is that like I have a demanding job and a demanding 2 children situation. And so I'm not able to do as much as I can, but I would say that in the time that I do spend, like, it is super important to me to support underrepresented groups. And so in terms of angel investments that I've done or companies that I've been involved with, almost every single one, I think there's one that is not, I think I have one white male founder and everything else is not. And I think everybody that I work with that has a commitment to having diverse teams, and so those are things that are important to me. I would say ironically, like, I think the worlds that are not as related to Stitch, like, it's like I know too much to be dangerous about what's hard about my business, and so like it's very hard for me to be excited about businesses that like are too close to mine, just because like it was super hard and like I know how it was hard, and so it's really hard to like set that aside. But yeah, I mean, I think in general, like if I had all the time in the world, I would love to just like be able to be more helpful and help all the amazing founders that there are out there.
Well, on that note, we are grateful that you spent time with us this morning, and we got to plug in for some Friday morning inspiration from you. So thank you so much for your time. And again, we had two parts to today. One was inspiration from Kat, and one was inspiration from networking with one another. It's really important to the culture that we do have at All Raise that this be a plug-in type of thing where you can come and get some inspiration, and that you also share with other people what your inspiration was, how you're going to be different, reach out to those around you to lift them up. So please carry forth from today with not only great tidbits, I have about 5 of them in my head that I've been trying to keep track of as you've been speaking, but also just people that you met, share what All Raise is about, and please continue to come to our events. We will be doing a survey after this, so ask for your feedback on that. And have a great Friday and weekend, everybody. Thank you.